The laugh that changed everything. The luxury restaurant gleamed with opulence. Golden chandeliers dripped with crystal, reflecting the warm ambient lighting over the pristine white-clothed tables. A grand piano played soft, elegant tunes in the background as the wealthy patrons dined, their laughter and clinking glasses echoing through the spacious hall. Seated near the center of the restaurant was Tiffany Lawrence, the 17-year-old daughter of one of the wealthiest businessmen in the country. With perfectly styled blonde waves, flawless makeup, and designer clothes that cost more than most people's monthly salaries, Tiffany exuded confidence and entitlement. Surrounded by her equally wealthy and spoiled friends, Tiffany was in her element. She enjoyed being the center of attention, dictating the latest trends, and laughing at those she considered beneath her. "Look at this menu, ladies," she scoffed, flipping through the leather-bound pages. "I mean, who even eats for less than $500 these days? This is barely worthy of our presence." Her friends giggled, nodding in agreement. They weren't just rich, they were privileged. As the waiter approached, a voice from the entrance caught their attention. It wasn't loud, but it was calm and composed, a voice that carried a quiet authority. "Just a table for one, please," the man said. Tiffany glanced toward the entrance, her curiosity piqued. The moment she saw him, she let out an exaggerated laugh, drawing attention from the entire restaurant. Dressed in a simple black t-shirt, jeans, and worn-out boots, the man looked completely out of place in the high-class environment. His dark, shoulder-length hair was tied back into a loose ponytail, and he carried himself with a relaxed, humble demeanor. But Tiffany and her friends didn't recognize him. To them, he was just a nobody. "Oh my God, do you see this guy?" Tiffany whispered, making sure her voice was loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Did he get lost on his way to a burger joint?" Her friends snickered, covering their mouths as they glanced at him. The man didn't react. He simply nodded politely to the hostess, who hesitated before leading him to an empty table near the corner. Tiffany, however, wasn't done. "Excuse me, sir," she called out mockingly. "I think you're in the wrong place. We have a dress code here." The man stopped, turning his head slightly in her direction. His eyes, warm but sharp, met hers for a fleeting second before he simply smiled and took his seat. The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the other guests looked uncomfortable. Some recognized him immediately, their eyes widening in disbelief. The waiters exchanged nervous glances, but none of them dared to say a word. Tiffany, completely oblivious, smirked and turned back to her friends. "I mean, come on. Who let him in? The only way he could afford anything here is if he's washing dishes in the kitchen." Another round of laughter erupted from her group. The man remained unbothered. He calmly picked up the menu, his fingers tracing over the options before he placed it down and motioned for the waiter. The waiter, clearly nervous, hurried to his side. "Sir, welcome. What would you like to order?" The man looked around the restaurant, his eyes briefly scanning every table. Then, in a voice that was calm yet commanding, he said something that made the entire room go silent. "I'll buy everything." The waiter blinked. I'm sorry, sir. "I'll buy everything on the menu," the man repeated, his voice unwavering. "Not just for myself, for everyone in this restaurant." The room fell into stunned silence. Even Tiffany stopped mid-laugh, her mouth hanging open. The waiter looked like he might faint. "Yes, sir, that's a lot of food. Are you sure?" The man pulled out a sleek black card and handed it over. "I insist." The manager rushed over, having heard the commotion. His face was pale as he took the card, his hands slightly shaking. One of Tiffany's friends, still confused, whispered, "Who is this guy?" A man at a nearby table, who had been watching the entire interaction, unfold, chuckled, and leaned in. "You seriously don't know?" he asked, shaking his head in disbelief. "That's Keanu Reeves." Tiffany's face drained of color. Her stomach twisted into knots as the realization hit her like a freight train. The man she had been mocking, the one she had laughed at, was one of the most respected, beloved, and wealthiest actors in the world. Not only that, but he was known for his humility, generosity, and kindness, the complete opposite of everything she had just displayed. Keanu Reeves, the Hollywood icon, had just bought out the entire restaurant without even blinking, and Tiffany had publicly humiliated herself in front of him. Her hands trembled as she watched Keanu lean back in his chair, completely unfazed by the stunned whispers around him. The entire restaurant was now watching her, waiting to see her reaction. For the first time in her entire life, Tiffany felt small. But the night was far from over, because what Keanu Reeves did next would change everything. A lesson in humility. The air inside the restaurant was thick with tension. Tiffany's laughter had long since died in her throat. Her face burned, a mixture of embarrassment and disbelief twisting her usually confident expression into one of sheer humiliation. Her friends sat in awkward silence, their eyes darting between her and Keanu Reeves, who remained seated, perfectly composed. The only sounds in the restaurant were the soft notes of the grand piano and the occasional murmurs of diners processing what had just happened. Keanu had bought everything on the menu. For everyone. And he had done it without the slightest hint of arrogance. Tiffany swallowed hard. Her father's name alone was usually enough to get her whatever she wanted. Respect, admiration, attention. But now, none of that mattered. In front of Keanu Reeves, her wealth meant nothing. She shifted in her chair, suddenly feeling exposed, as if all her worst traits had just been placed under a magnifying glass for the world to see. But Keanu wasn't even looking at her anymore. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, thanking the waiter as he accepted a simple glass of water. The manager, still holding the black card, struggled to find words. "Mr. Reeves, this is incredibly generous, but are you certain? This is a full-course luxury restaurant, and the final bill will be..." Keanu waved a hand dismissively. "It's fine." His voice was calm, steady. "Just make sure no one leaves hungry tonight." The guests gasped, exchanging looks of awe and admiration. For most people dining at this restaurant, money wasn't an issue. They could afford the overpriced meals. But that wasn't the point. It wasn't about money. It was about the gesture, the kindness, the grace. Tiffany clenched her fists under the table. Why wasn't he mad? Why wasn't he calling her out? In her world, if someone disrespected another person, the response was swift and brutal. Public humiliation, social exile, or revenge. But Keanu wasn't doing any of that. He wasn't retaliating, wasn't rubbing his wealth in her face, wasn't demanding an apology. Instead, he was just being himself. And somehow, that was worse. Tiffany's hands shook as she gripped her fork, her mind racing for a way to regain control of the situation. But Keanu wasn't playing her game. And then he spoke. The value of a meal. Keanu lifted his glass and took a sip, before setting it down with deliberate care. Then, finally, he looked up, straight at Tiffany. The moment their eyes met, Tiffany felt something shift inside her. Not anger, not pity, just understanding. "You know," Keanu began, his voice quiet but powerful, "I remember a time when I couldn't afford a meal like this." Tiffany's throat went dry. His words landed like a stone in the silence of the restaurant. Everyone listened. Everyone wanted to hear what he had to say. Keanu tapped his fingers against the table, eyes distant, as if he was recalling a different time. A different version of himself. "When I was a young actor," he continued, "I was struggling to pay rent. Some nights, I had to choose between taking the bus home or eating dinner. And sometimes, the choice wasn't even mine, because I just didn't have enough." Tiffany's fingers twitched. She had never, not once, in her life been forced to make a choice like that. She had never gone hungry. Never wondered if she'd have a place to sleep. Never worried about whether she'd make it to the next day. Keanu exhaled softly. "I remember sitting outside a cafe once, just watching people eat, smelling the food but knowing I couldn't afford anything. And then, he smiled slightly. An old man saw me, and without a word, he bought me a meal. A ripple of emotion swept through the restaurant. Keanu's expression was thoughtful. He didn't ask for anything in return. He didn't laugh at me. He just shared what he had. He let those words hang in the air, letting their weight sink into every heart in the room. Then, finally, his gaze returned to Tiffany, and I never forgot that. Tiffany looked away. She felt something unfamiliar twisting inside her chest, a feeling she wasn't used to. Guilt. It was like a mirror had been placed in front of her, forcing her to see who she really was, not just the version she carefully crafted for social media, not just the perfect, polished heiress, but the girl who had mocked a stranger because of how he looked. The girl who had assumed wealth meant superiority. The girl who, despite having everything, had never learned the true value of generosity. And suddenly, she hated that version of herself. Why did you do that? The tension in the restaurant had shifted. Where there was once judgment and arrogance, there was now reflection. The wealthy guests, some of whom had also laughed at Keanu earlier, felt the sting of his unspoken lesson. Even Tiffany's friends, who had egged her on, looked deeply uncomfortable. But Tiffany, she was drowning in her own shame. She swallowed hard and did something she had never done before. She stood up, took a deep breath, and walked over to Keanu's table. He raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, simply watching it as she approached. Tiffany stopped a foot away, her hands clenched at her sides. Then, before she could stop herself, the words tumbled out. "Why?" she whispered. Keanu tilted his head. "Why what?" Her voice was shaky. "Why did you do that? Why did you buy everything?" Keanu studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes kind but piercing. "Because I can," he said simply, "and because I remember what it's like to have nothing." His words hit her like a tidal wave. Tiffany had spent her whole life showing off her wealth. She had used it as a weapon, as proof of her superiority. But Keanu, he used his wealth to uplift people, to bring joy, not to belittle. It was the exact opposite of everything she had ever believed. Her lips trembled. I didn't mean." "I know," Keanu interrupted gently, "but now you do." Tiffany's vision blurred with tears. For the first time in her life, she felt something she had never truly felt before. She wanted to change. One last gesture. The waiters began serving the paid-for meals. The mood in the restaurant had transformed into something warm, reflective, humbling. People started talking, not about wealth, not about status, but about kindness. And Tiffany? She did something no one expected. She pulled out her own black credit card. "I want to pay it forward," she said, her voice steady this time. "Find someone outside, someone who looks like they need a meal. Let them come in. It's on me." Keanu smiled. And for the first time in her life, Tiffany Lawrence felt lighter. Because maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than money. And maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something new. The price of change. Tiffany sat frozen at her table, her credit card still clutched between her fingers. The air in the restaurant had shifted, completely transformed from the shallow, elitist atmosphere it had been just an hour ago. People were talking, not about stock portfolios or luxury vacations, but about generosity, kindness, the power of a single meal. And Tiffany was experiencing something she never had before, a feeling that no amount of money could erase. Shame. But beneath that shame, for the first time in her 17 years, she felt something else. Hope. "Are you sure?" The head waiter, a man in his 40s with sharp features and a meticulously pressed uniform, hesitated as he stared at Tiffany's credit card. He wasn't used to this version of her, the real version. I'll go find someone," he finally said, bowing his head slightly before walking toward the front doors. Tiffany exhaled slowly, her heart pounding. What am I even doing? She had never given back before. Not like this. Sure, she had attended charity galas, had her picture taken handing out pre-packaged meals, even given out money when the cameras were on. But this was different. For the first time, there were no cameras, no expectations, no personal gain, just a chance to do something right. And she didn't even know why she was doing it. You remind me of someone. Keanu, who had been watching the whole time, leaned forward slightly. He was still calm, observing, thinking. You remind me of someone, he said. Tiffany blinked, surprised. Who? Keanu tilted his head, his expression unreadable. Me. The word sent a shockwave through Tiffany's chest. Her. Like Keanu Reeves, the most humble, respected man in Hollywood. The guy who had just completely turned the mood of this restaurant around without breaking a sweat. How? Tiffany scoffed before she could stop herself. I doubt that. Keanu's lips quirked slightly, but his eyes remained serious. When I was younger, he said, I made mistakes. I let my ego get in the way of who I really was. But the truth is, deep down, most people want to be good. They just don't know how yet. Tiffany frowned, his words digging deep into places she didn't want to acknowledge. Did she even know who she was? She had spent her whole life in a bubble of privilege, a world where money dictated everything, where people laughed with her, not at her. And now, she was sitting across from a man who had everything, yet still understood what it meant to have nothing. He's just a homeless man. The head waiter returned 10 minutes later, leading an older man into the restaurant. He was thin, his hair matted, and his clothes tattered. His shoes were barely holding together, and he clutched a small bag to his chest like it contained everything he owned. The moment he stepped inside, the stares began. Some diners looked away, uncomfortable. Others whispered. A few even rolled their eyes. Tiffany recognized those expressions. They were the same kind she had given Keanu when he first walked in. The older man stopped, hesitating. He glanced down at his torn shoes against the pristine marble floors. He looked at the wealthy diners, then at Tiffany. And she realized he was waiting to be kicked out. He had been in places like this before. And every time, the outcome was the same. Leave. You don't belong here. Tiffany's stomach twisted. She turned to the waiter. Seat him wherever he likes. The man blinked, startled. Even Keanu raised an eyebrow, impressed. The homeless man hesitated. Miss, I don't want to be a bother. You're not. Tiffany's voice was steady. Sit, eat. His wrinkled face softened, and slowly, cautiously, he sat down at one of the finest tables in the entire restaurant. Tiffany looked around, noticing how some diners were still whispering. She clenched her jaw. She knew what she had to do. And for the first time in her life, she stopped caring what the rich people in the room thought. She stood up, grabbed a menu, and walked over to the man's table. She set it down in front of him. Order whatever you want. The man stared at her, eyes wide with disbelief. Miss, are you sure? Tiffany hesitated only a moment before nodding. Yes. And this time, she meant it. Change hurts. Tiffany sat back down, her heart still racing. Keanu was watching her with something close to approval. You know, he said after a moment, change isn't easy. Tiffany exhaled. Yeah, I'm figuring that out. Keanu chuckled. You will. The real question is, are you going to keep going? She didn't know the answer. Because change wasn't just a single good deed. It wasn't just one moment of kindness. It was a decision. One she had to make again and again. Was she ready for that? For the first time, Tiffany didn't know. But she wanted to be. And maybe that was enough. A meal to remember. The night continued. The homeless man ate his meal in peace. Other diners, inspired by Keanu's and Tiffany's actions, began paying for meals outside the restaurant, inviting those in need to join. The atmosphere had completely transformed. What had started as a night of arrogance and entitlement had turned into something deeper, richer, more meaningful. And Tiffany. She sat there, quietly taking it all in. She had laughed at a man for how he dressed, and in return, he had taught her a lesson about what truly matters. And as she watched Keanu Reeves, this legend of a man who had once been just as lost as she was, she realized something. Maybe she wasn't too far gone after all. Maybe she could still become someone better. And maybe, just maybe, tonight was only the beginning. Key first true test. The restaurant had transformed. Where there had once been shallow conversations about designer brands and high society, there was now something real, a shared experience, a moment that meant something. The air carried the scent of expensive dishes, but for the first time, the meals weren't just about indulgence. They were about compassion, humanity, change. And for the first time in her life, Tiffany felt part of something greater than herself. But change, real change, is never easy. And Tiffany's first true test was about to come sooner than she expected. Who do you think you are? Tiffany had barely let out a breath when the inevitable backlash came. I cannot believe this. The words were sharp, venomous. Tiffany turned her head just in time to see her mother storming toward her. Catherine Lawrence was the embodiment of perfection, ruthlessly polished, immaculately dressed in a deep emerald gown that cost more than the annual salaries of most people. Her hair was pulled into a sleek bun, her posture impeccable, her expression icy. And she was furious. Behind her, Tiffany's father, Richard Lawrence, followed, looking more tired than angry, as if he had seen this coming and had given up trying to stop it. Tiffany felt her stomach twist. She knew this moment was coming. Her parents had always controlled everything. How she dressed, how she behaved, who she associated with. She had grown up in their world, a world where wealth was everything, and appearances mattered more than truth. And tonight, she had publicly humiliated them. Catherine reached Tiffany's table, her heels clicking against the floor like gunshots. "What?" she hissed. "Are you doing?" The entire restaurant had gone quiet again, this time for an entirely different reason. Tiffany swallowed hard. Catherine's gaze flicked to the homeless man still eating his meal, then to Keanu Reeves, who was watching the situation unfold with quiet, unreadable eyes. And then she turned her full attention back to Tiffany. "You have embarrassed us," she said, her voice low and sharp as a blade. "Our family name, our reputation." Tiffany flinched, not because she was scared, not because her mother's words hurt, but because, for the first time in her life, she didn't agree with them. This is the real me. Tiffany took a deep breath. She had spent years folding under her mother's authority. She had spent years playing the role of the perfect rich girl, acting like nothing mattered but wealth and status. But tonight had changed something in her. Keanu had changed something in her, and now she couldn't go back. Tiffany met her mother's glare head-on. "I didn't embarrass us," she said, her voice steadier than she thought possible. "I finally did something right." Catherine's lips parted in disbelief. "Excuse me." Tiffany stood up. Her mother was taller in heels, but for the first time, Tiffany didn't feel small in front of her. "I laughed at a man tonight," Tiffany admitted, "because of how he dressed, because I assumed he was beneath me." A murmur rippled through the restaurant. Tiffany ignored it. She kept going. "But he wasn't beneath me," she said. "I was beneath him." Gasps, stares, shock. Tiffany didn't care. She turned to Keanu. "He taught me a lesson I should have learned a long time ago. That wealth doesn't make someone better." She turned to the homeless man. "That everyone deserves dignity. A meal. A chance." Her voice softened. "And that maybe, just maybe, I can be more than who I was before. Choose." Catherine's expression had darkened into something dangerous. "This is nonsense," she spat. "You sound ridiculous." Tiffany stayed firm. Catherine leaned in, voice so low only Tiffany could hear. "This little act you're putting on ends now," she whispered, "or you can consider yourself out of the family." Tiffany's chest tightened. The final test. Her mother was giving her a choice. Go back to who she was, spoiled, shallow, wealthy beyond imagination. Or choose this new path, uncertain, terrifying, real. Tiffany felt her father watching her, his gaze filled with something strange and unreadable. Keanu was watching too, his face calm, but his eyes understanding. For a moment, everything in Tiffany's life flashed before her eyes. The luxury, the status, the ease, but also the emptiness. She swallowed hard. Then she turned to the homeless man. "Do you want dessert?" she asked gently. "I heard the chocolate souffle here is amazing." The man blinked, stunned. Catherine's face went pale. Tiffany had made her choice. "I knew you had it in you." Her mother stormed out. Her father, after a long, deep sigh, followed her. And just like that, Tiffany Lawrence was no longer their daughter. She felt the weight of it settle over her. The loss. The freedom. Then, a voice beside her. "I knew you had it in you." Tiffany turned to see Keanu smiling, the first real, genuine smile she had ever seen from him. "Really?" she asked. He nodded. "You just needed a little push." Tiffany let out a breath and smiled back. And for the first time, it was real. The beginning of something new. The night continued. The restaurant felt different now. Warmer, more human. More people began to pay it forward. More strangers came in, receiving meals with dignity. And Tiffany sat at her table, watching it all unfold. She had lost her status, her wealth, her old life. But she had gained something far more valuable. A new beginning. And maybe, just maybe, that was worth everything. The quest of freedom. Tiffany had never experienced silence like this before. Not the comfortable silence of being alone in a luxury penthouse, where everything was carefully designed for perfect acoustics and peace. Not the silence of a shopping spree, where money spoke louder than words and a swipe of a card meant instant gratification. This was a different kind of silence. A silence filled with consequences. A silence that meant everything had changed. And now she had to face the cost of her decision. No going back. Tiffany stood outside the restaurant, her arms crossed, staring at the city lights. Her mother had disowned her. Her father had followed without a word. And now, for the first time in her life, Tiffany Lawrence had nowhere to go. She took out her phone, her fingers hovering over her father's contact. Would he answer? Would he try to fix this? Would he pretend nothing had happened? Or worse, had he already erased her from their lives? She swallowed hard and put the phone back in her pocket. She already knew the answer. They weren't coming back for her, and even if they did, she wasn't going back. "Do you have a place to stay?" A voice beside her pulled her from her thoughts. Keanu. He stood with his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable but calm as ever. Tiffany hesitated. The answer was no. She didn't have a place to stay. But she wasn't about to admit that. She forced a smirk, the old Tiffany fighting to surface. "What, are you offering me a room at your mansion?" Keanu chuckled. "No, but I know a good motel that won't overcharge you." Tiffany stared at him. A motel. She had never stepped foot in a motel before. Never even considered it. She hesitated, her pride screaming at her to decline, to figure something else out. But the truth was, she had nothing. No home. No staff waiting on her. No wealth to cushion the fall. Just herself. And for the first time, that had to be enough. She exhaled. "Fine. But if I get bedbugs, I'm blaming you." Keanu smirked. "Deal. Welcome to the real world." The motel was nothing like the places Tiffany was used to. No marble floors. No scented candles. No concierge offering champagne upon arrival. The walls were slightly faded, the air smelled faintly of cigarettes and cheap air freshener, and the lobby was small and functional, not extravagant. She swallowed hard, fighting the instinct to sneer. "This is your life now, Tiffany. Get used to it." The receptionist, an older woman with kind eyes, looked up. "Need a room?" Tiffany hesitated, then reached for her card, only to stop midway. Her credit cards were probably already canceled. Her heart sank. Keanu, noticing, smoothly stepped forward. "One room. One night." Tiffany turned to him, her pride flaring. "I can." Keanu shook his head. "You can get me back later." The receptionist handed over the key. "Room 204. Keanu gave her a polite nod before turning to Tiffany. "Welcome to the real world." She rolled her eyes. "Oh, shut up." But deep down, she wasn't sure she'd survive it. The loneliest night. The motel room was small and plain, with a bed, a desk, and a window overlooking the parking lot. No luxury silk sheets. No expensive artwork. No staff waiting on her needs. Just her. Alone. For the first time, the weight of everything crashed over her. She had lost everything in a single night. Her home. Her status. Her security. And the scariest part. She had no idea who she was without it. She curled up on the bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for regret to come. But it never did. Instead, something else crept in. Something she had never felt before. Freedom. It was terrifying. It was overwhelming. But it was real. And for the first time, Tiffany Lawrence was finally free. What now? Morning came too quickly. Tiffany sat at the motel's tiny dining area, poking at a slice of toast and a styrofoam cup of coffee. Across from her, Keanu watched her with an amused expression. "You look like someone who just discovered what a budget breakfast is." Tiffany made a face. "I'd kill for a croissant and a caramel latte right now." Keanu grinned. "Better get used to truck stop coffee." She sighed. "Is this your way of saying I need a job?" Keanu leaned back. "Unless you're planning to live here forever." The thought sent a shiver down her spine. But he was right. For the first time, she had to figure out how to survive on her own. "How did you do it?" she asked suddenly. Keanu raised an eyebrow. "Do what?" "Start over. Build something for yourself." Keanu went quiet for a moment, then exhaled. "I worked," he said simply. "Took jobs no one wanted, slept in places no one would, learned what it meant to have nothing." Tiffany's stomach twisted. That's what was ahead of her, wasn't it? Hard work, struggle, sacrifice. The idea of it scared her. But for the first time, it didn't repulse her. She tapped her fingers against the table. "You think I can do it?" Keanu smirked. "I think you already made the hardest choice." Tiffany snorted. "What, turning down my mother's offer?" "No," Keanu said, choosing to be better. Tiffany fell silent. Because for the first time, she actually wanted to be. "Let's see what you're made of." The sun was rising, casting golden light over the city that was now her reality. Tiffany Lawrence had lost her old life. But now, she had a new one to build. Keanu stood, stretching. "Come on. Let's find you a job." Tiffany groaned. "Ah, you're enjoying this, aren't you?" Keanu grinned. "A little." She sighed, running a hand through her hair. Then, with a deep breath, she stood up and followed him out the door. Because if she was going to survive this, she had to prove, once and for all, who Tiffany Lawrence really was. The Ferris step into the real world. Tiffany Lawrence had spent her entire life in silk sheets and marble hallways. She had never worried about money, never struggled to earn a paycheck, never questioned where her next meal would come from. Until now. Now she was just another girl in the city. And for the first time, she had to work for survival. Welcome to reality. Keanu led Tiffany through the busy morning streets, the city alive with honking taxis, rushing pedestrians, and the scent of fresh bagels from a nearby street cart. Tiffany had never walked this much before. Her designer shoes, once a statement of luxury, were completely impractical on the cracked sidewalks. She winced every few steps, trying not to look as out of place as she felt. Keanu, of course, noticed. He smirked. "You know, you might want to trade those for something a little more functional." Tiffany shot him a glare. "Oh, I'm sorry. Should I be wearing work boots now?" Keanu grinned. "Wouldn't hurt." She rolled her eyes, but secretly admitted that he was probably right. Her entire wardrobe was designed for high society, not survival. And that was the first realization that stung. She was not equipped for this life. And yet she had no choice but to adapt. "You're hired." Maybe. Tiffany had never applied for a job before. She had never needed one. But now she found herself standing in front of a small cafe, staring at a handwritten sign taped to the glass door. "Hill P. Wanted. No experience needed." Keanu nodded toward it. "This is a good start." Tiffany frowned. "A cafe? You want me to be a barista?" Keanu folded his arms. "You got a better plan." She didn't. With a deep breath, she pushed the door open. The cafe was nothing like the high-end restaurants she used to dine in. It was small, warm, and smelled of coffee and fresh bread. The wooden floors creaked slightly, and the walls were decorated with framed pictures of smiling customers. Behind the counter stood a woman in her 50s, her dark hair pulled into a loose bun, an apron tied around her waist. She looked up as Tiffany entered, giving her a quick once-over. "Can I help you?" Tiffany hesitated. She glanced back at Keanu, who gave her a small nod. She turned back to the woman and forced herself to speak. I'm here about the job." The woman raised an eyebrow. "You ever worked in a cafe before?" Tiffany swallowed. "No." "Ever worked anywhere before?" Tiffany hesitated again. "No." The woman sighed, setting down the rag she had been using to wipe the counter. "Look, sweetheart, this job isn't easy. It's early mornings, long hours on your feet, and people aren't always polite." She eyed Tiffany's expensive outfit. "You sure you're up for that?" Tiffany straightened. "Yes." The woman studied her for a long moment. Then she let out a sigh. "Fine. Trial shift tomorrow morning at 6. Show up on time, and we'll see what you're made of." Tiffany blinked. 6 in the morning. Keanu snickered behind her. The woman smirked. "Welcome to the real world, kid." A night of doubt. That night, Tiffany lay awake in the cheap motel bed, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow, she would be working. Not attending a gala. Not shopping. Not lounging in a penthouse. Working. And she wasn't sure she could do it. She had never cleaned tables. She had never made coffee. She had never served anyone in her life. Would she even last a day? She rolled over, frustration burning in her chest. This wasn't her life. She wasn't meant for this. And yet, a part of her knew this was exactly where she needed to be. The hardest thing she's ever done. At 5:30 a.m., Tiffany groggily pulled herself out of bed. She had never been up this early without a personal assistant making her breakfast. She threw on the plainest outfit she owned, a simple hoodie and jeans, courtesy of a thrift store Keanu had dragged her to yesterday. It felt strange not being dressed in designer. But this was her life now. She arrived at the cafe on time, her stomach twisting with nerves. The owner, who she now knew was named Maria, nodded approvingly when Tiffany stepped in. "Didn't think you'd show." Tiffany forced a smirk. "I don't quit before I even start." Maria handed her an apron. "Good. Then let's see if you can keep up." Welcome to chaos. The moment the cafe opened, Tiffany's nightmare began. Customers rushed in. Orders piled up. The espresso machine hissed like a demon. Maria barked instructions. 2 cappuccinos for table 5. Don't forget the sugar station. You're spilling milk everywhere, kid. Tiffany was drowning. She dropped a tray. She messed up orders. She nearly burned herself on the coffee machine. She was used to being served, not serving others. And for the first time in her life, she felt invisible. No one cared about her last name. No one catered to her. No one treated her like she was special. She was just another worker, and it was humbling in the worst way. Why are you still here? By noon, Tiffany's arms ached, her legs burned, and she was covered in coffee stains. She leaned against the counter, exhausted, watching Maria handle 3 orders at once with 0 mistakes. How did she do this every day? Maria glanced at Tiffany and smirked. Still here? Tiffany wiped sweat from her forehead. You sound surprised. Maria chuckled. Most rich girls would have run out of here screaming by now. Tiffany exhaled. I thought about it, she admitted. Maria nodded. Yeah, but you didn't. Tiffany blinked. She hadn't, had she? She had wanted to quit 100 times today, but she had kept going. Why? Because, for the first time in her life, she wanted to prove she could. Maria clapped her on the shoulder. You keep this up, and you just might make it, kid. For the first time since she started, Tiffany smiled. Because maybe, just maybe, she was finally earning something for herself. The final lesson. Tiffany Lawrence never thought she'd be standing behind the counter of a tiny cafe, covered in coffee stains, her arms aching, and her feet screaming in protest. She never thought she'd work for a paycheck, much less one that barely covered rent. But here she was, and for the first time in her life, she felt real. But reality had a way of testing people, and Tiffany was about to face her biggest test yet. A single mistake. It was a busy Friday morning, and the cafe was packed. Orders were flying in faster than Tiffany could keep up. The espresso machine whined, the register beeped, and the scent of fresh pastries filled the air. Tiffany had improved over the past week. She wasn't perfect, far from it, but she was getting better. Until she made a mistake. A customer, a businessman in a sharp suit, glanced at his watch, clearly in a hurry. Large cappuccino, extra hot, he said, barely looking up from his phone. Tiffany nodded, moving quickly. She steamed the milk, poured the espresso, added the foam, and handed him the cup. Here you go. The man grabbed it, took a sip, and immediately spat it out. The entire cafe went silent. Tiffany's stomach dropped. The man wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, his face twisting in anger. This is a latte, he snapped. I asked for a cappuccino. Do you even know how to do your job? Tiffany's heart pounded. I'm so sorry, she stammered. Let me remake it. The man slammed the cup on the counter. Unbelievable, he muttered. I don't have time for this. Maria, the cafe owner, stepped forward, her voice firm. We'll fix it, sir. The man huffed but didn't argue. Tiffany's hand shook as she remade the drink. She never made mistakes like this, not in her old life. Her reputation had been everything. Flawless, untouchable. Now she had just humiliated herself in front of the entire cafe. She handed the new drink over with an apology. The man snatched it, muttered something under his breath, and walked out. Tiffany swallowed hard, avoiding the stares from the customers. She felt like a failure. She thought about walking out. She thought about quitting. But then, a familiar voice spoke up. Bad day. Tiffany turned to see Keanu Reeves leaning against the counter, watching her with an amused expression. She groaned. You saw that, didn't you? Keanu smirked. Every painful second. Tiffany sighed. Great, just what I needed. An audience. Keanu tapped the counter. Let me tell you something. Tiffany crossed her arms. Oh boy. Another life lesson. Keanu chuckled. It's a good one. Trust me. He leaned forward slightly. You think failure is the worst thing that can happen to you. Tiffany frowned. Isn't it? Keanu shook his head. No, the worst thing is never trying again. Tiffany hesitated. Keanu continued. Success isn't about never failing. It's about what you do next. He nodded toward the espresso machine. So, what are you gonna do? Tiffany bit her lip. And then she got back to work. The return of an old ghost. By the time her shift ended, Tiffany was exhausted. She wiped down the counter, stretching her sore arms. Maria passed by, tossing her a small envelope. "Your first paycheck, kid." Tiffany caught it, staring at it. A paycheck. Her paycheck. It wasn't much. Nowhere close to what she used to have. But she had earned it, and that meant more than any amount of money ever had. She smiled. "Thanks, Maria." Maria nodded. "You did good today. Mistakes happen. What matters is that you stayed." Tiffany exhaled, letting those words sink in. She had stayed. She hadn't quit. She had kept going. For the first time, she was proud of herself. But her victory was short-lived, because when she stepped outside the cafe, someone was waiting for her. A sleek black car was parked across the street, and leaning against it, arms crossed, was her father, Richard Lawrence. Tiffany's breath caught. Her father had always been the quiet one, the observer. Her mother had been the one to command, to control. But her father, he was the one who made things happen behind the scenes. And now he was here, waiting for her. Tiffany took a deep breath and walked over. "Come back home." Richard Lawrence studied her as she approached. She knew that look. It was the same look he gave business deals before signing them. Finally, he spoke. "You've made your point," he said simply. Tiffany blinked. "Excuse me." "You've proven whatever it is you needed to prove," Richard continued. "You don't have to keep playing this game. It's time to come home." Tiffany stared at him. Home. Like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't been disowned. Like she hadn't just built something for herself for the first time in her life. She exhaled sharply. "Why now?" Richard's jaw tightened. "Because your mother doesn't control everything. And because this life," he gestured at the cafe, "the streets, isn't yours." Tiffany felt something shift inside her. Before, she would have jumped at the offer. Before, she would have gone back without hesitation. But now she knew who she was without their money. Now she knew she didn't need them. Tiffany squared her shoulders. "You're wrong," she said quietly. Richard narrowed his eyes. "Tiffany, this is my life now," she said, "and I'm not going back." A flicker of something, pride, disappointment, respect, crossed her father's face. For a moment, he was silent. Then he nodded, just once. "All right." And just like that, he got in the car, drove away, leaving Tiffany standing there, her heart pounding, and knowing she had made the right choice. A new beginning. Tiffany exhaled. Then she turned and walked back toward the cafe, toward her new life. Keanu was waiting by the door, arms crossed, smirking. "He tried to bring you back, didn't he?" Tiffany nodded. "And you said no." Another nod. Keanu grinned. "I knew you would." Tiffany rolled her eyes. "Don't act like you predicted everything." Keanu chuckled. "Nah, but I did know one thing." He leaned in slightly, eyes full of pride. "You were always stronger than you thought." Tiffany smiled. And for the first time in her life, she believed it.